You are looking at a painting called Diogenes Searching for a Man by Giovanni Castiglione. What the heck is going on here? What is all this mess? Who is Diogenes? Why is he searching for a man? Why does he have a lantern during daytime? And are these even men? This one looks like a satyr, and this one is either a river god whose river has dried up or some sort of pauper. What's going on with all these animals? As you can see, this is a weird painting. It's also a very beautiful painting. It's painted very beautifully. So let's enjoy feasting our eyes on it while I take a crack at decoding it and seeing how far I can get towards some kind of an interpretation. But first, let's place this in time and space. This was made by Giovanni Benedetto Castiglione. He was from Genoa, Italy, and he lived during the 1600s, which was the high point of the Baroque era. Now, Rome during the Baroque era was kind of the epicenter of innovation and kind of what you would see as the avant-garde. If you were an artist during the Baroque, you wanted to be in Rome. That's kind of where it was all going on. Castiglione traveled to a lot of important places in Italy. He stayed in Florence, he stayed in Naples, he lived in Mantua at the end of his life, but he did spend quite a few years in Rome, and this painting may have been made during that time when he was in Rome, or may have been made afterwards when he returned to Genoa for a while. At any rate, it is considered to be in his mature style. A little bit more about Castiglione. He was known for his etching. Etching was a new technology at that time, a kind of printmaking that used a metal plates that were scratched into, usually using acids of various kinds. And this metal plate etching was new. The previous type of printmaking had been done with woodblock. So this was kind of a new, exciting technology that was used a lot during the Baroque. However, Castiglione is credited with inventing a whole new style of printmaking called the monoprint or monotype. And this is it's a kind of an unusual type of printmaking. You can only get one image. That's why it's mono. So it's not it didn't take off. It didn't become like a really popular way of doing things. However, if you study art and if you've taken printmaking classes, you will have been introduced to the monotype or the monoprint, and Castiglione was the first person we have on record to invent this way of printmaking. Speaking of printmaking, Castiglione did make an etching of this same subject. It shows a different composition, different elements in this one, but it is useful in trying to understand the symbolism in the painting. Okay, enough background info. Let's get on to analyzing this painting. Let's start with the title, Diogenes Searching for a Man. Well, we've got to know who Diogenes is, so let me tell you in case you don't know. Diogenes was a Cynic philosopher. In fact, he pretty much started Cynicism as a philosophical school. The word cynic comes from the ancient Greek word for dog, because the Cynic philosophers lived like dogs in the street. They were kind of like gutter punks, like homeless people like punks. People who criticize society. The whole view of the Cynic philosophers was a view kind of akin to the punk rock view that society has, civilization itself is a corrupting influence on man. If you are familiar with the sadhus of India, they kind of give a similar vibe. There's something ascetic about the choice to be a Cynic philosopher. Asceticism being sort of the rejection of pleasures and comforts. So what's up with the title? What's this searching for a man? What does this mean? It's from a story that Diogenes went around with a lantern at daytime, and when people asked him what he was doing, why he had a lantern during the day, he replied that he was searching for a man. Now he was in the middle of a city full of men, and so it's kind of an interesting thing to say, since he was literally surrounded by men. It seems to imply that he could not find a real man anywhere in the city. It's such a perplexing statement. It's been interpreted over the centuries in different ways. So sometimes you will see the quote as, Diogenes searching for an honest man or a rational man. A lot of people have read into this story kind of, well, okay, he must have been saying that he's looking for a rational man or an honest man. That's kind of what he meant. That's kind of how it's interpreted generally. But the actual wording in the primary source that comes down to us is just Diogenes replied that he was searching for a man. Okay, so that accounts for Diogenes and his lantern. Let's look at the rest of the objects depicted here. Let's just kind of take stock of what's here, and then we'll see if we can do a little bit of analysis. We've got right here a statue of Marsyas. Now, I just did a video all about Marsyas. Who was Marsyas? And some different statues that look very much like this one. In fact, one of the statues that I talked about in that video probably was the basis for this depiction of a statue of Marsyas. Castiglione was probably somewhere where he could observe the statue and record it and draw it, use it as the model for this painting. So that's very interesting. If you want to know more about Marsyas and the artworks, the ancient Roman artworks that depict him, go ahead and click the video. I'll link it in the description. But just to summarize, basically, Marsyas was a satyr who was flayed alive by the god Apollo for having the hubris to challenge the god to a musical contest. All right, how does that play into this? Not sure, but let's just kind of keep that in our back pocket as we continue. Below the statue of Marsyas, we have what look like two, well, they're not really men, are they? Two figures. One is a satyr, and one is a man, okay, but I'm not sure if he's supposed to be a literal man or a river god. Now, this was extremely frustrating to me, but I could not find the article where I originally read this interpretation. There was an article somewhere, some blog or something, where they said that this was a river god whose river had dried up. And I think that's indicated by this pot, this empty pot that is not flowing. You know, there should be a river flowing from it, but there isn't. I don't know if that is actually accurate or not, and I really wish I could have found that article. When I went back to look for it, I couldn't find it anywhere. If any of you have found that article or know why this is, why someone at least thought that this is a river god, go ahead and put it in the comments below. But it might have something to do with the head covering. A head covering is something in Roman religion. They would cover their heads when they were conducting sort of sacred rites. They would pull the toga up over the head. So I'm not really sure if I think maybe the Nile, when the Nile is depicted as a god, it has its head hidden in cloth or something like that. Not really sure. Anyway, let's keep moving. What else do we see here? So obviously there are a lot of animals. We've got a goat, and then on this side we've got a cow, what looks like a turkey, some rabbits below it. We've got some dead birds. These look like some sorts of fowl that would be eaten. So I think one looks like a chicken. I don't know if these other things are partridges or maybe there's a duck in there too. There's also a cow skull near the cow. Oh, and there's a dog that's kind of hidden here between the cow and the turkey. And then next, we have just what looks like a bunch of trash, really. There's just a bunch of, I heard it described as detritus. In fact, let me go ahead and read you that passage. This is from the museum website where this painting is housed. This painting is in the Prado Museum in Spain, if you're interested in visiting it, if you happen to be passing through Spain. The museum website describes this as an enigmatic scene that includes other elements more worthy of a bacchanal, a satyr, a pagan idol, a man reaching out to a goat, other animals and objects scattered around the floor, dead birds, shells, bones, vessels, recall the detritus of a decadent, vice-ridden society. I just love that word detritus applied to these objects. Detritus, of course, is sort of like decomposing matter, things that are falling apart, like what you find in the soil, just kind of things in a state of decay. And of course, that goes along perfectly with the subject of Diogenes, who would have been critical of the decadent, vice-ridden society. So overall, I do agree with the museum website that this has something to do with the decay of society. That doesn't really explain the animals, though, nor does it explain the figures. Let's take a minute and contemplate these figures. So I feel like it's easier to understand the satyr because the satyr is a symbol of lust, and that's pretty standard. That is pretty well understood. And when I say that the satyr is a symbol of lust, I don't necessarily mean that negatively. It could be taken as a negative depending on who is using the symbol. But generally, both in the actual classical antiquity as well as by the Renaissance times and beyond, you could see the satyr used as a symbol for lust that was both in terms of lascivious sexual desire, but also just kind of life-loving, wine-loving, loving of song and dance, a full-bodied, animalistic sort of zest for life in a general sense. So if we look at this figure of the satyr, he's sticking out his tongue. That could either be like taunting or teasing, or, if we're going to take it in the homoerotic direction, tempting or flirting. And it's interesting that he also seems to be mirroring the action of the goat beside him. So maybe the goat is bleating and he's, bleating in imitation of the goat. Not sure exactly. He has an instrument in his hand. This looks like some sort of an oboe. It could be that at this early stage in the Baroque, the artists still didn't have a very complete vision of what ancient Greek and Roman instruments looked like. So it could be that Castiglione is copying more of an instrument that he's familiar with. And then in general, the satyr contrasts with the man across from him, because the man across from him is like kind of down and sad, and the satyr seems to be happy and relaxed. Now, for the man that he's sitting across from, I'm not going to go very far into the kind of speculating about whether he is supposed to be a river god whose river has dried up, because I don't have access to that article I read before, and I'm not sure that person was correct anyway. Again, if you have information about this, please put it in the comments below. I would love to follow up. But I'm just going to sort of take it from what I can. I'm going to take what I can get just by looking at it. Okay, so he's got his head covered. I did mention that could be a sign for the Romans of piety, something related to religious ritual. However, nothing about the man's pose seems to suggest religious ritual at all. He seems to be like a poor beggar, basically. And the way his hand is stretched out, it does look like he's begging. And the way he's looking down, it looks like he's ashamed, humble, humiliated, impoverished. Very interesting. I started to get this idea that the whole thing, maybe the whole thing is a joke, and maybe this man is extending his hand out towards the satyr, as the satyr symbolizing unbridled lust for life, and the man holding his hand out, maybe what he's asking for is an erection. Maybe the man symbolizes impotence. He's lost his erection, and so he's asking for the magic to inspire his member, or something like that. Some sort of begging for. And maybe that could flow into the river no longer flowing, maybe it's something like that. That was one idea that occurred to me that I thought was funny. This, of course, is long before the age of Viagra, so maybe the best that they could do back then is pray to the satyrs for an erection. Now, obviously, I'm not going to put too much stock into that interpretation, but I do think there's something like that, in the sense that the satyr seems to possess joy and fullness and like that quality which allows one to enjoy life, whereas the man seems to lack that, and so he's in some sense begging for whatever that is. So is Castiglione trying to suggest that this is the true state of man? That we are all kind of like this pauper, this poor beggar, begging for some fulfillment and gratification, some pleasure from life. That we are all just ultimately driven by sexual desire, perhaps, underneath all of the other things, maybe like indicating that as sort of the deepest root of all the various things that motivate us in life. But before we settle on an interpretation, let's go ahead and take a look at this etching and see what we can glean from this. One thing you'll notice right away is that Diogenes is the only man in this composition. There he is with his lantern, but there is no satyr, no river god. We've just got a monkey, an owl, and a tortoise that are sort of rummaging through these sort of debris. We've still got the cow skull, so that's interesting. We've still got a cracked pot, but a lot of the other stuff is kind of different. Look at this. This is a herm. A herm is sort of a boundary marker, or kind of I guess it was used to mark boundaries, and it also sort of had like kind of a sacred, some kind of sacred connection with the god Hermes, but also this one seems to be a Silenus or a satyr of some sort. It's not Marsyas though, and that's important. So whereas his painting shows a statue of Marsyas, this Marsyas is not depicted as a herm. You can tell this is a herm, by the way, because the bottom portion of it is just a block, and that's how herms were made. The upper portion would be a torso, or sometimes it would just be a head connected to a big blocky kind of pillar. Speaking of pillars, we also have the cracked and broken pillar here. And, well, it's really just the base of a pillar, isn't it? I don't know. It's also kind of funny to notice that the penis of the herm has been broken off. So if we're going to hearken back to that kind of tentative interpretation that I made about this being sort of like a plea for Viagra in a certain sense, spiritual Viagra, I guess, then that might be also something that's woven into this one. Again, I don't want to put too much stock into that interpretation. It's kind of radical and maybe missing the mark, but I just think it's funny. Oh, I did just realize I was wrong. There actually is a satyr in this one. It's just that he's way off in the background. You can barely see him. He's just indicated by a few squiggly little lines, and it looks like he's herding a flock of sheep or goats out here in the background. So nowhere near as prominent as the one in the painting, although, just his presence here probably means something. But let's consider, again, the title, Diogenes Searching for a Man. And in this one, there are no men. They're just animals. That, to me, does suggest that Castiglione is trying to say that men are just animals, we're beasts, we want to crack ourselves up to be more than we really are. Our opinion of ourselves is too high, and if we could see ourselves as we really are, we just see these beasts rummaging through the detritus of society. I'm reminded in this one of Aesop's fables. Now, Aesop, I believe, was an ancient Greek. I didn't know that growing up. I thought Aesop's fables I didn't realize they were ancient Greek fables. But I believe Aesop was an ancient Greek. And one of Aesop's fables talks about a group of monkeys who are sort of admiring themselves, and a man who stumbles across them and refuses to placate them. He refuses to tell them. He basically just tells them the truth. When they ask the man, "What do you see when you see us?" and he says, "I see monkeys," and they tear him to pieces. Whereas another man lies to them and says, "Oh, I see these fabulous, this fabulous people." So maybe there's something, some sort of reference to that. Oh, by the way, you may have noticed there's an inscription down here on the bottom, and you may, like me, be thinking, oh, well, maybe it just explains what this is all about in the inscription. So I did try to read it, and I do speak Italian, but not that great. Good enough to kind of get a general idea. However, this inscription is so hard to read just because of the way that it is written there. These objects interrupt the text, and it's really hard to it's just hard to read it. Even if it was in English, it would be hard to read it. So that kind of hindered me. And to the degree that I was able to understand the rest of it, it does seem to reference more the patron that Castiglione was making this for, perhaps. So I'm not really sure. Again, if you're able to make a better transcription of this, put it in the comments below. Let me know. You can get a really good high-quality file, by the way, of this from the Art Institute of Chicago. They have it on their website. Now, returning to the painting again, what does it mean that he later, I'm assuming the painting was done later, I may be wrong about that, but what does that mean that he later chose to substitute the statue of Marsyas for the Herm? I imagine that Castiglione knew who Marsyas was and knew what this statue referenced, and therefore put it in there on purpose. Of course, it is possible that he didn't, and that this was just, some statue of, some ancient statue that, he had access to, and he's like, oh, let me put this ancient statue in here. That's possible too, but let's say that he did know who Marsyas was, then this offers an interesting chance, I think, to talk about an aspect of Marsyas that I didn't really talk about in the video on Marsyas. And that is Marsyas as a symbol of free speech and speaking truth to power. And this was apparently a very Roman interpretation of the Marsyas myth. Now, if we tie that back to what I said about Aesop's fables, particularly that fable about the monkeys ripping the man apart because he told them the truth about themselves. Oh, and one more thing. Also, Socrates was called was likened to Marsyas by Alcibiades. Alcibiades was one of the I don't want to say greatest Athenians of his time, but he was certainly a larger-than-life figure in Athens during the time of Socrates. And Socrates was well known to be ugly, and he was often sort of, people said he had a snub nose like a satyr. So Alcibiades is likening him to Marsyas, but after the version of Marsyas that is seen as a wise satyr, in contrast to the usual satyrs that are kind of frivolous. So if we assume that Castiglione had all this knowledge in the background, then this reference to Marsyas kind of looming over this scene may refer in some sense to that this is what happens, just like Socrates was killed for speaking truth to power, just like Marsyas was if you're going to interpret it that way, killed for speaking truth to power or challenging power. Okay, so now let's take that and let's tie it all together. You could say that Diogenes is searching for a man. He finds only animals and satyrs and, this impoverished state of nature. But anyone who wants to really point that out explicitly runs the risk of becoming a martyr for truth, just like Socrates or Marsyas. Now, is that what's actually going on here? Is that the real meaning of this painting? Who knows? Maybe I hit on it. Maybe I got lucky and that's actually what this is about. Or maybe it is an allegory for a man who can no longer get an erection and he's begging the nature spirits to provide him with that missing virility. But I gotta be honest with you guys, I actually don't think I think the answer is really none of the above, all of the above, all and none of the above. I think that Castiglione is just kind of messing with us. When Bob Dylan was writing some of his best kind of mishmash poetry, free association, just like verbal diarrhea kind of stuff that he was doing. And look, I'm calling it that, but it's actually great songs, right? Like Subterranean Homesick Blues, right? He admitted to some of his friends at the time that he was just throwing a bunch of crap together and laughed at the fact that people would someday be trying to figure out what he was trying to say when it really meant nothing. I think maybe Castiglione is doing something similar here visually. He's throwing all these things at us, things that we know he knows that we will try to piece together in some sort of a meaning. And I do believe he has certain threads of meaning that he has intentionally woven in here, obviously, right? And yet there's a lot of things that I think are red herrings, a lot of things I think he's thrown in just to kind of like give us food for thought and keep the wheels spinning without necessarily, meaning that these things have to have a really solid symbol for each object. Now, I could be wrong about that. And if you have an interpretation, maybe you have more knowledge about the Dutch vanitas, that sort of still life genre, the vanitas genre, which he's obviously drawing on here. By the way, he loved Dutch painting and the painting from Flanders and, this whole sort of Northern Renaissance influence. And people go really deep into animals and animal symbolism. Again, I know from looking at other paintings by Castiglione, he's always just putting animals. He just loves to paint and draw animals. So again, I'm kind of feeling like he's just throwing it all together just for an excuse to paint a bunch of stuff. But if you think you have a better interpretation, like I said, put it in the comments below. I would love to see what you think about this. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton and I really appreciate it if you do. My channel is not monetized, but I do have a book you can buy and it's called Thoughts. If you want to find it, just look up Brian D.K. Thoughts on Amazon, but make sure you have books selected when you search Brian D.K. Thoughts, otherwise it won't show up. It has around 150 illustrations. It took me about 10 years to make it, and it really is just a collection of random thoughts, thoughts on many different subjects ranging from mortality, romance, quasi-philosophical issues. It's full of my art, so if you're interested in seeing my own drawings, then there's many, many examples in this book. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and ciao for now.